Imagine building a system that makes your kingdom richer, stronger, and more connected to the outside world. Now imagine realizing that the same system is beginning to consume your own people. In 1526, King Afonso I of Kongo wrote an urgent letter to the King of Portugal. Free men and women were being kidnapped, nobles were being seized. Even people connected to the royal court were disappearing into commercial networks leading toward the Atlantic coast. Afonso demanded tighter control over the trade and protested the illegal enslavement of his subjects. At first, this sounds like the story of a courageous ruler standing against the expanding Atlantic slave trade. But there is one uncomfortable problem. Years earlier, Afonso's own government had participated in, regulated, and benefited from that same growing trade. He had not created the system, but he believed he could control it. And if you think this story has a simple hero and a simple villain, stay until the end. Because Afonso was not merely a victim of the system. He was also one of its participants. So was he a ruler, trying to save his people from a force that had escaped his control? Or was he simply trying to reclaim authority over a trade that had once served his throne? Welcome to Lost to History, where the past is rarely as simple as the version we remember. This is the story of King Afonso I of Kongo, the king who tried to stop a system he had helped expand. When Portuguese ships reached the mouth of the Congo River in the late 15th century, they did not encounter a collection of isolated villages. They encountered the Kingdom of Kongo. It was a centralized state with a monarch, provincial governors, courts, taxation, military organization, and extensive regional trade. Its capital, Mbanza Kongo, stood at the center of a political network whose influence extended across parts of what are now northern Angola and the western Democratic Republic of the Congo. The Portuguese arrived looking for commerce, diplomatic allies, Christian converts, and access to the resources of Central Africa. But the rulers of Congo saw opportunities of their own. European ships could provide weapons, luxury goods, skilled artisans, literacy, and access to distant diplomatic networks. A major royal conversion took place in 1491 when King Nzinga Nkuwu was baptized and adopted the Portuguese name João. His son, Mavemba Nzinga, embraced Christianity more deeply. After winning a struggle for succession, he became king in 1509 and ruled as Afonso I. Afonso did not simply surrender his kingdom to Portuguese influence. He attempted to use the relationship to strengthen royal authority. He supported churches and schools. He encouraged literacy among members of the elite. He exchanged letters with European rulers and religious officials. One of his sons, Henrique, studied abroad and was appointed a titular bishop in 1518. To Afonso, Christianity, literacy, and European diplomacy may have appeared to be tools for building a stronger state. Now imagine yourself in his position. A foreign power arrives with ships, books, weapons, and connections to distant markets. You can reject the relationship and risk isolation, or you can attempt to control it and use it before it begins using you. Afonso chose control. For a time, that strategy appeared to work, but it depended on one dangerous assumption. The king believed he could decide which parts of this new relationship entered Congo and which parts remained outside. Forms of slavery and dependency already existed in Central Africa before the Portuguese arrived. People could lose their freedom through warfare, punishment, debt, or political subordination. But these systems were not identical to the Atlantic trade that was beginning to expand. The status and treatment of enslaved people varied considerably. Some were incorporated into households, farming communities, royal service, or political structures in ways that differed from the plantation slavery that later developed across the Atlantic world. That does not mean their condition was voluntary or humane. Enslavement still involved coercion, loss of freedom, and vulnerability to exploitation. The growing Atlantic trade added a different and increasingly dangerous pressure. Portuguese-controlled islands such as São Tomé were developing sugar plantations that required large numbers of laborers. Overseas buyers increasingly valued people for their ability to be transported permanently out of the region. That demand changed the political calculation. Prisoners captured during wars could now be exchanged for imported goods. Military campaigns could produce both territory and captives for sale. Officials, soldiers, merchants, and local intermediaries could profit by directing captives toward the coast. Afonso's government attempted to regulate this trade. Approved markets and royal procedures were used to control commercial activity and determine who could legally be exported. The monarchy benefited from imported goods and political connections created through the trade. It also permitted the export of people whom royal authorities classified as legitimate captives or enslaved dependents. This does not mean that Afonso created the Atlantic slave trade, nor does it mean that he could have predicted the enormous system that would develop over the following centuries. But Kongo was not merely a passive victim during the trade's early expansion. The royal court participated in it. It attempted to regulate it, and it benefited from it. This is where the moral picture becomes uncomfortable. Afonso could be an intelligent ruler trying to strengthen his kingdom and, at the same time, a monarch willing to exchange people captured through war. Those two realities do not cancel each other out. They existed together. The system initially appeared manageable because the king believed he could maintain a clear boundary. Some people were classified as legally enslaved. Others were protected as free subjects of Kongo. But profitable systems rarely respect boundaries for long. Once merchants, officials, soldiers, and intermediaries discovered how much could be gained, those categories became easy to manipulate. By the 1520s, Afonso was describing a kingdom in crisis. Portuguese merchants were no longer operating only through channels approved by the crown. Some formed direct relationships with provincial officials and local traders. Others moved beyond the king's supervision entirely. The demand for captives encouraged kidnapping. According to Afonso's surviving letters, free people were seized and sold after being falsely identified as enslaved. Members of respected families were not always protected. Even people connected to the royal court could disappear into commercial networks leading toward the coast. In 1526, Afonso wrote to King João III of Portugal. He complained that merchants were flooding Kongo with imported goods, undermining obedience to royal authority, and encouraging officials to participate in illegal trafficking. More urgently, he warned that free subjects were being kidnapped. He asked Portugal to limit the merchants entering his kingdom and requested more priests and teachers instead. But Afonso's proposed solution was not the abolition of slavery in the modern sense. He demanded tighter royal control over the trade. People presented for export were supposed to be examined by royal officials. The purpose was to determine whether they were legally enslaved under Kongo's laws or had been kidnapped while free. That distinction is essential. Afonso clearly objected to the illegal seizure of free Congolese subjects. He objected to merchants bypassing his laws. He objected to the loss of population, political authority, and royal control. But the surviving evidence does not show that he rejected every form of slavery in principle. He may have felt genuine alarm and moral outrage at the abuses unfolding around him. He may also have feared that uncontrolled trafficking was hollowing out his state and weakening his throne. Both motives may have been present. Human beings rarely act for only one reason. Kings are no exception. Afonso had participated in a commercial system because he believed he could regulate it. By 1526, too many people were profiting from that system for one ruler to control it easily. One interpretation remembers Afonso as a king who recognized the destructive direction of the Atlantic trade earlier than many of his contemporaries. His letters are remarkable historical evidence. They show an African monarch addressing a European king as a diplomatic equal. They document kidnapping, corruption, and the erosion of royal authority. Afonso did not remain silent while free subjects were taken from his kingdom. He attempted to restrict foreign merchants, protect those considered legally free, and restore royal supervision. From this perspective, he was defending Kongo against a commercial force that had grown far beyond the relationship he originally accepted. But another interpretation is less forgiving. Some historians emphasize that Afonso's government had already participated in the trade and benefited from it. His objections became especially urgent when merchants bypassed the crown, kidnapped protected subjects, and threatened the political order. Under this interpretation, Afonso was not attempting to eliminate the system. He was attempting to restore the monarchy's authority over who could be enslaved, who could be exported, and who received the profits. There is also a third possibility. Perhaps the distinction between moral concern and political interest is too simple. A king could sincerely grieve for kidnapped subjects while continuing to accept the enslavement of war captives. He could believe slavery was legitimate under certain laws, while recognizing that Atlantic demand was destroying those laws. He could be both a participant in the early trade and an opponent of its uncontrolled expansion. The surviving evidence does not allow us to reduce Afonso to either a hero or a villain. Much of what historians know comes from royal correspondence and Portuguese records. These sources reveal a great deal about diplomacy and government policy, but they tell us far less about the ordinary people caught inside the system. We rarely hear the voices of those whom royal officials classified as legitimate captives. We know even less about those who were kidnapped and never returned. Their absence should make us cautious whenever this story becomes a debate only about the intentions of kings. Afonso's story matters because history often prefers simple categories: resistor or collaborator, victim or architect, reformer or hypocrite. But systems are often built by people who do not foresee what those systems will eventually become. Afonso pursued international trade because he wanted to strengthen Congo. That trade enriched parts of his court, supplied imported goods, and supported his political ambitions. Then its incentives spread beyond his control. Merchants bypassed royal authority. Officials discovered private opportunities. Military conflict became increasingly connected to foreign demand. Legal categories could be manipulated whenever someone stood to profit. The system did not require every participant to share the same plan. It only required enough people to benefit from keeping it alive. Afonso's letters, therefore, document more than one king's frustration. They capture the moment when a ruler realized that political authority could not easily control a profitable international network. He may have opened the door believing that he would decide who passed through it. But once the doorway became crowded with merchants, officials, soldiers, and intermediaries, the king himself could no longer close it. And if you enjoy morally complicated stories like this, where history refuses to give us a simple hero or villain, consider liking the video and subscribing to Lost to History. It helps us bring more forgotten, disputed, and misunderstood stories from around the world back into the conversation. So how should history remember Afonso I? As an African ruler who tried to protect his people from an expanding Atlantic trade, as a monarch who objected mainly when that trade began threatening his authority, or as something more difficult, a man who participated in a regulated system, then discovered that regulation had become an illusion? If a ruler contributes to the growth of a harmful system and later struggles against its worst consequences, does that struggle redeem him? Or does responsibility begin the moment he first agrees to participate? You decide. Were Afonso's letters evidence of a genuine moral awakening? Or were they an attempt to reclaim control of a trade that had escaped royal authority? Tell us what you think in the comments. Because in history, the most important question is not always who was right. Sometimes, it is who believed they were still in control.